The footage is still on my phone, buried in a folder marked evidence that I can't bring myself to delete, but can't bear to watch again. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of high-definition video that destroyed everything I thought I knew about the world, about safety, about the creatures that share the wilderness with us. The timestamp reads September 15th, 2023, 6:42 a.m., and if you watch carefully, you can see my wife Rebecca running for her life through the morning mist, while something that shouldn't exist pursues her with intelligent, deliberate malice. I'm telling this story because Rebecca deserved better than the official explanation that was fed to her family. Because other people need to know what's really out there in the remote areas of the Cascade Mountains. And because I can't carry this knowledge alone anymore, without losing what's left of my sanity. The authorities called it a bear attack, said the video was too unclear to definitively identify what was chasing her, claimed that the traumatic nature of the experience had distorted my perception of events. But I know what I filmed that morning. I know what I found 3 days later in a clearing that the search teams never reached. And I know that my wife's death wasn't a random animal encounter. It was a hunting, a killing, carried out by something with intelligence that matches or exceeds our own. Something that has been sharing these mountains with us for longer than we've been keeping records of what lives in the wilderness. My name is Marcus Reed, and until September 2023, I was a nature documentary filmmaker living in Seattle with my wife, Rebecca, who worked as a wildlife biologist for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 12, and we'd spent more time in the backcountry of the Pacific Northwest than most people spend in their own neighborhoods. Rebecca could identify animal tracks from 100 different species, could read the forest like a book written in signs and signals that most people never notice. She was brilliant, passionate about. The Cascade Mountains have always been our sanctuary, the place where we went to remember why we'd chosen careers dedicated to protecting wild places and the creatures that inhabit them. We'd camped throughout the region for over a decade, from the volcanic peaks of the North Cascades to the old-growth forests of the Olympic Peninsula. We knew the trails, the weather patterns, the seasonal behaviors of every major species in the ecosystem. Our anniversary tradition was to spend a long weekend at Cascade Creek, a remote drainage in the Glacier Peak wilderness that required a 12-mile hike from the nearest road and offered some of the most pristine wilderness remaining in Washington state. We'd discovered the area 5 years earlier while researching filming locations for a documentary about old-growth forest ecosystems, and it had become our special place, the location where we'd scattered my father's ashes and where Rebecca had accepted my proposal. The creek itself flows through a valley carved by glaciers during the last ice age, surrounded by peaks that rise over 8,000 feet and forests that have never been logged. The ecosystem is essentially unchanged from what Lewis and Clark would have encountered 2 centuries ago. Design stands of Douglas fir, western hemlock, and western red cedar that create a canopy so thick that the forest floor exists in perpetual twilight. It's home to all the major predators of the Pacific Northwest: black bears, grizzlies in the highest elevations, cougars, wolves that have migrated down from Canada, and countless smaller predators that maintain the complex balance of relationships that keep the ecosystem functioning. Rebecca and I had encountered all of these species during our years of camping and filming in the area, and we'd developed protocols for coexisting safely with even the most dangerous animals. But we'd never encountered anything like what we found during our anniversary trip in September 2023. We'd planned the trip for months, coordinating our schedules so we could take 5 days off work and spend them in the place that meant more to us than anywhere else on Earth. Rebecca was working a 4-season tent that could handle whatever weather the mountains might throw at us, sleeping bags rated for temperatures well below freezing, a camp stove and fuel for cooking, enough food for 6 days to allow for weather delays, water purification equipment, first aid supplies, and emergency communication equipment, including a satellite communicator that would allow us to call for help if anything went wrong. Rebecca also carried her research equipment: trail cameras for documenting wildlife movement, GPS units for mapping animal travel corridors, and collection supplies for gathering data about plant and animal populations at different elevations. Her work was funded by a National Science Foundation grant that was studying how climate change was affecting species distribution in high-elevation ecosystems throughout the Cascades. I brought my camera equipment, though this trip was supposed to be personal rather than professional. Still, I never went anywhere without at least one high-quality video camera, and the forests around Cascade Creek offered opportunities for capturing wildlife footage that could be valuable for future projects. The camera I carried was a professional-grade unit, capable of shooting 4K video in low-light conditions, with image stabilization and audio recording that could document both visual and acoustic details of whatever I might encounter. The hike to our campsite took most of the day, following a trail that climbed steadily through changing ecosystems as we gained elevation. We started in second-growth forest that had been logged decades ago, progressed through mature forest that was recovering from historical disturbance, and finally reached the old-growth ecosystem that surrounded Cascade Creek itself. The weather was perfect for September hiking: clear skies, comfortable temperatures, and the kind of crystal-clear visibility that makes the mountains look close enough to touch. Rebecca was in her element, stopping frequently to photograph plants and animal signs, making notes about changes she observed since our last visit, collecting GPS coordinates for locations where she wanted to place trail cameras. We reached our campsite around 5 p.m., a familiar clearing beside the creek where we'd camped. Rebecca was excited about the trail camera locations she'd identified during the hike, and I was looking forward to filming the sunrise sequences that were only possible in locations far from artificial light pollution. After dinner, we sat beside the fire talking about our future plans, the documentary projects I was developing, the research Rebecca wanted to pursue after finishing her current grant. We'd been trying to have children for 2 years without success, and lately our conversations often turned to questions about fertility treatments, adoption options, and how parenthood might change our lifestyle of wilderness travel and remote camping. "Whatever happens with kids," Rebecca said that night, "I want to make sure we never lose this. I want our children to grow up knowing places like this exist, understanding what it means to be part of something larger than human civilization." Those were among the last words she spoke to me as we sat together beside the campfire, sharing dreams about a future that would never happen, making plans that would never be fulfilled. Within 36 hours, she would be dead, killed by something that shouldn't exist, in a way that challenged everything we thought we knew about the natural world. We went to sleep around 10 p.m., zipping our sleeping bags together inside the tent and listening to the sounds of the forest settling into its nighttime rhythms. The creek provided constant background noise that masked smaller sounds and helped us sleep, while the tent walls glowed softly with starlight, filtering through the forest canopy. I woke up several times during the night to sounds that seemed unusual, though nothing that triggered serious concern. Something large moving through the forest at a distance, the crack of branches that might indicate a bear or elk passing through the area. Occasional vocalizations that could have been owls or other nocturnal wildlife. Rebecca slept soundly through all of it, exhausted from the long hike and the excitement of being back in her favorite research location. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering our tent and ice forming along the edges of the creek. Rebecca woke up, energized and eager to begin placing her trail cameras, while I was looking forward to filming the quality of light that only exists in old-growth forests during the early morning hours. We ate breakfast together as the forest came alive around us. Birds beginning their dawn chorus, small mammals moving through the underbrush, the sounds of an ecosystem transitioning from night to day. Rebecca reviewed her GPS coordinates and planned the sequence for placing her cameras, while I checked my equipment. Rebecca was at home in the forest, capable of spending days alone in remote areas without any safety concerns. And I was equally comfortable hiking and filming independently in familiar terrain. But this time was different, though neither of us had any indication that anything unusual was happening in the area. The forest seemed normal, The wildlife behavior was consistent with what we'd observed on previous visits, and there were no obvious signs of predator activity or environmental disturbance that might indicate unusual dangers. Rebecca's research protocol required her to place cameras along established wildlife corridors, focusing on areas where animal tracks indicated regular usage by multiple species. She carried 4 trail cameras, each equipped with motion sensors and night vision capabilities that would allow her to document wildlife activity 24 hours a day over the several weeks the cameras would remain in place. The cameras were sophisticated research equipment, capable of recording high-definition video and still images, GPS stamping each recording with location and time data, and storing weeks of footage on high-capacity memory cards. Rebecca had been using similar cameras for years in her wildlife research, and she documented everything from rare bird species to predator-prey interactions that provided valuable data about ecosystem health and species populations. I was filming with my handheld camera, focusing on sequences that would show the ancient forest ecosystem in the kind of detail that could only be captured with professional equipment and careful attention to lighting and composition. The old-growth forest provided opportunities for filming that were impossible to find in more accessible locations. Trees that were centuries old, understory plants that existed nowhere else, and wildlife behaviors that occurred only in undisturbed wilderness areas. By 11 a.m., I'd captured several hours of footage that I knew would be valuable for future documentary projects. The morning light filtering through the forest canopy created opportunities for filming that lasted only a few hours each day, and I'd taken full advantage of the conditions to document visual elements that would be impossible. The forest was dense enough that visibility was limited to 30 or 40 feet in most directions, and the creek noise masked smaller sounds that might indicate what was happening. As I ran upstream, I could hear other sounds, something large moving through the forest, branches breaking, and what sounded like pursuit. Something was chasing Rebecca through the forest, something fast enough and powerful enough to crash through underbrush that would slow down a human. Something that seemed to know the terrain well enough to maintain pursuit through difficult terrain. I reached the area where Rebecca had been working on her camera placement around 11:15 a.m. and immediately saw signs of disturbance that indicated something violent had occurred. One of her trail cameras was lying on the ground, torn free from the tree where she'd mounted it, with the mounting strap broken and the camera casing cracked. Her backpack was nearby, partially emptied, with some of her research equipment scattered in a pattern that suggested struggle. But Rebecca wasn't there, and the sounds of pursuit were moving away from the location, heading deeper into the forest, in a direction that would take them further from our campsite, and further from any possibility of rescue or assistance. I followed the trail of broken vegetation and disturbed ground, moving as fast as I could while trying to maintain visual contact with signs that would lead me to Rebecca. But whatever was pursuing her was moving faster than I could follow on foot, and the trail became increasingly difficult to follow as they moved into denser forest and more difficult terrain. After about 20 minutes of pursuit, I lost the trail entirely. The sounds of movement had faded into the distance, and the forest had returned to its normal, quiet rhythms. I stood in a small clearing, breathing heavily and listening intently for any sound that might indicate Rebecca's location or condition, but heard nothing except the normal background noise of wind and wildlife. I tried calling her name, shouting as loudly as I could and listening for any response. But the forest seemed to have swallowed her completely, leaving behind only the scattered equipment at the original location and the memory of her terrified scream echoing through the trees. By late afternoon, I realized I needed to get help. I hiked back to our campsite, gathered the emergency communication equipment, and climbed to a ridge where I could establish satellite contact with emergency services. I called 911 at 4:23 p.m. on Thursday, September 14th, and reported that my wife was missing in the Glacier Peak wilderness, possibly injured in an animal attack. The 911 operator took detailed information about our location, Rebecca's physical description, the equipment she was carrying, and the circumstances of her disappearance. A search and rescue operation would be mobilized immediately, but it would take several hours for the first teams to reach our remote location, and a comprehensive search wouldn't begin until the following morning. I spent Thursday night alone at our campsite, keeping a large fire burning and listening to the forest sounds for any indication that Rebecca might be trying to return. Every crack of a branch, every unusual sound triggered hope that she was alive and making her way back to safety, followed by disappointment when the sounds resolved into normal wildlife activity or settling forest noises. The search and rescue teams arrived Friday morning around 8 a.m., flown in by helicopter and equipped with tracking dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and communication gear that would allow them to coordinate a comprehensive search of the area where Rebecca had disappeared. I showed them the location where I'd found her scattered equipment, described the sounds I'd heard, and the trail I'd attempted to follow, and provided them with GPS coordinates for every location where I'd searched the previous day. The dogs picked up Rebecca's scent at the original location and followed a trail that led deeper into the forest. But they lost the scent after about a mile in an area where the terrain became increasingly difficult and the forest grew denser. The thermal imaging equipment found no heat signatures that might indicate a human presence, and radio calls received. The search and rescue teams arrived Friday morning around 8 a.m., flown in by helicopter and equipped with tracking dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and communication gear that would allow them to coordinate a comprehensive search of the area where Rebecca had disappeared. I showed them the location where I'd found her scattered equipment, described the sounds I'd heard, and the trail I'd attempted to follow, and provided them with GPS coordinates for every location where I'd searched the previous day. The dogs picked up Rebecca's scent at the original location and followed a trail that led deeper into the forest, but they lost the scent after about a mile in an area where the terrain became increasingly difficult and the forest grew denser. The thermal imaging equipment found no heat signatures that might indicate a human presence, and radio calls received no response from Rebecca's emergency equipment. By Friday evening, the official search had covered over 20 square miles without finding any additional trace of Rebecca. The terrain was extremely difficult, with steep slopes, dense vegetation, and numerous areas where someone could fall and be hidden from aerial observation. The search teams were professional and thorough, but they were looking for signs of an injured hiker, not evidence of predation by an unknown species. I convinced the search coordinator to let me accompany the teams on Saturday, arguing that my familiarity with Rebecca's research protocols and the local terrain might help identify locations where she might have gone. I also had my video camera with me, continuing to document the search in case the footage might be useful for understanding what had happened to her. But I recognized the site for what it actually was: evidence that something non-human, something intelligent, had been living in the forest for an extended period and had established a base of operations that allowed it to observe and potentially hunt humans who entered its territory. Saturday afternoon, while searching a different area about 3 miles from Rebecca's disappearance location, I found what I'd been dreading since Thursday morning. The location was another small clearing. This was a human body like it was made of paper. Her clothes had been removed and arranged in patterns around the clearing, not randomly scattered, but deliberately positioned in ways that suggested meaning or ritual purpose. Her body showed signs of examination or dissection, with cuts and separations that were too precise and purposeful to be the result of scavenging by normal wildlife. But it was her head that destroyed something fundamental in my understanding of the world. Rebecca's head had been severed from her body and placed on a raised stone platform in the center of the clearing, positioned so that her face was directed back toward the trail that led to our campsite. The separation was clean, accomplished with tools or strength that no human could possess, and the positioning was clearly intentional. Her face had been altered. The features I'd kissed goodnight for thousands of nights had been changed in ways that served some purpose I couldn't understand. Not random damage from scavengers, but deliberate modifications that suggested intelligence and intent behind the mutilation. The most disturbing aspect was her eyes. They'd been opened and positioned to stare directly down the trail, as if whoever had arranged her remains wanted her to be watching for other humans who might enter the area. The expression on her face wasn't the peaceful repose of death, but something that looked almost like a warning, a message directed at anyone who might find her. Around the clearing, I found evidence of the intelligence that had killed her. Footprints that were clearly not human, much larger than any known animal, showing evidence of bipedal locomotion and opposable digits that could manipulate tools. The prints were pressed deep into the forest soil, indicating body weight that exceeded anything in the known wildlife inventory for the Pacific Northwest. There were also tool marks on trees and rocks around the clearing, cuts and scrapes that showed evidence of implement usage by something with strength far beyond human capabilities. The tools themselves weren't present, but the marks they'd left indicated metal or stone implement that had been shaped for specific purposes and used with knowledge of their applications. Most disturbing were the arrangements of bones. The footage was graphic and horrible, but it was also evidence of intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about what forms of consciousness existed in wilderness areas. But even as I filmed, I could hear sounds from the forest around the clearing that indicated I wasn't alone in the area. Something large was moving through the forest, maintaining a distance from the clearing but clearly aware of my presence and monitoring my activities. The sounds were too coordinated and purposeful to be random wildlife, and they came from multiple directions that suggested more than one creature was watching me. I finished documenting the scene and began hiking back toward the main search area, but I could hear them following me through the forest, not pursuing aggressively, but pacing me as I moved, staying just far enough away to remain hidden while maintaining surveillance of my movements. The behavior was intelligent and strategic, suggesting they were evaluating me as a potential threat while ensuring I left their territory without taking anything that belonged to them. When I reached the search team and reported finding Rebecca's body, their reaction was immediate disbelief, followed by professional skepticism as they accompanied me back to the clearing. But when they saw what I'd documented, their demeanor changed to something closer to fear than disbelief. The scene was unlike anything in their experience of wilderness search and rescue. The precision of the body preparation, the intelligence behind the arrangements of clothing and remains, the evidence of tool usage and planning that exceeded anything attributable to known wildlife behavior. The official investigation that followed was comprehensive, but predetermined in its conclusions. Rebecca had been killed by a large predator, most likely a grizzly bear that had been defending territory or cubs. The unusual aspects of the scene were attributed to scavenger activity after her death, with multiple species contributing to the displacement and arrangement of remains. The tool marks were explained as claw damage from large predators, while the footprints were dismissed as unclear impressions that could be attributed to various animals under different soil conditions. The video footage I'd shot was acknowledged. The service celebrated her contributions to wildlife research and conservation, her passion for protecting wild places, and her belief that humans could coexist sustainably with the natural world. But I couldn't participate in the celebration of her life, because I was haunted by the knowledge of how it had ended. Not in a random encounter with a dangerous animal, but in a deliberate hunting by something intelligent enough to plan, execute, and ritualize her death for purposes I couldn't understand. After the funeral, I tried to fight. I took my footage, the 3:47 video from my phone, and the hours of documentation from the clearing, to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. The detective, a man named Brody with tired eyes and a condescending patience, reviewed it with me. "Mr. Reed, you've been through an unimaginable trauma," he said, handing the phone back. "Your mind is trying to make sense of something senseless. A bear attack is chaotic. What you're seeing as patterns, as intelligence, it's just pareidolia. Your brain is creating order where there is none. And the footprints?" "The tool marks ? I demanded, my voice cracking. "We had experts look at the casts. They were inconclusive. Could be a bear stepping in its own track, a person, anything. As for the cuts on the trees, This is a wilderness area. There's been logging, trappers, prospectors, for over 100 years. You can't attribute every scratch on a rock to your wife's death. I went to Rebecca's department, the WDFW. I met with her supervisor, a man who had always praised her work. He offered condolences but grew visibly uncomfortable when I pushed for answers about what other predators could be in that region. Marcus, we have no credible evidence of any unclassified primate species in Washington. It's folklore. Rebecca is dead because of folklore? He sighed, shuffling papers on his desk. Rebecca is dead because she worked in a dangerous profession in a dangerous place. The cabin's main room became my war room. I pinned a large topographical map of the Glacier Peak Wilderness to one wall. I marked our campsite, the location of the attack, the spot where I found the strange settlement, and the clearing where Rebecca died. I spent my days and nights online, falling down a rabbit hole of cryptozoology forums, missing person databases, and archives of local newspapers. I analyzed my own footage 1,000 times. I bought professional video enhancement software and went through the 347 clip frame by agonizing frame. In the chaos of the shaking camera, for a split second, I isolated something. Between two massive fir trees, as Rebecca stumbled, a shape resolved itself from the background. It was tall, impossibly broad, covered in dark, matted hair. But it was the arm that made my blood run cold. It was long, muscular, and as it swung forward, I could see a hand, 5 distinct digits, clutching something that wasn't a rock or a stick. It looked like a crafted stone tool, a primitive, heavy axe. The authorities called the video unclear. They were lying. It was perfectly clear if you were willing to see. My research led me to a pattern. Dozens of cases over the past 50 years, all within the PNW. Hikers vanishing from trails, loggers disappearing from work sites. The official explanations were always the same. Lost, succumbed to the elements, animal attack. But the details, when I could find them, were eerily similar. Strange vocalizations heard before the disappearance. Campsites found in disarray, but with valuables left behind. In a few rare cases where remains were found, there were reports of unusual post-mortem manipulation. I knew I needed help. I was a filmmaker, not an investigator. I used a portion of Rebecca's life insurance to hire a man named Frank Coltrane, a retired Seattle PD detective turned PI. He was grizzled, cynical, and expensive. A man who had been with the U.S. Forest Service for over 2 decades and had been present at the scenes of at least 4 other, unexplained disappearances in the Cascades. This guy isn't a ranger, Frank concluded. He's a cleaner. There's something going on, Marcus, a cover-up. I still don't know what they're covering up, but they're damned good at it. Frank was in, not because he believed in monsters, but because he couldn't stand a lie, especially one perpetrated by men with badges. My online research eventually led me to a name that kept appearing in the margins of academic papers and the footnotes of obscure folklore books. Dr. Aris Thorne, a retired professor of anthropology and biology from the University of Washington. Thorne had been a rising star in the 70s until his career was derailed by his controversial theories about undocumented primate species in North America. He was now considered a crackpot, a cautionary tale for academics who strayed too far from the mainstream. Rebecca had even mentioned him once, calling him brilliant but misguided. I found Thorne living in a cluttered house near the Puget Sound, surrounded by stacks of books, maps, and plaster casts of enormous footprints. He was in his late 70s, with a wild mane of white hair and eyes that still burned with an intense, fierce intelligence. He watched my footage in silence, his expression unreadable. When it was over, he didn't offer condolences. He simply nodded. "The Patterson-Gimlin film showed us they exist," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Your film shows us what they are, Not apes, not relics. Something more. He looked at me. The ritualistic display of your wife's remains. This is not the behavior of an animal. This is a message, a territorial declaration. They are communicating. Thorne explained his theory, pieced together over 50 years of research, interviews, and ridicule. He believed a species of hominid, far more intelligent. They know these things are out there. Their goal is suppression. They believe that if the public knew, it would lead to panic, vigilante hunts, and an economic collapse in the tourism and logging sectors. So they discredit, they cover up, and when necessary, they eliminate the evidence. Thorne's information gave me a framework, but I needed a deeper understanding. He pointed me in one final direction: the indigenous communities who had lived in these mountains for 10,000 years. They know them better than anyone, Thorne said. They don't see them as monsters. They see them as another people. I found him through a contact at a local tribal cultural center. Joseph Blackwood was a respected elder of the Sasquatch tribe, a man whose ancestors had called the lands around Glacier Peak home since the ice receded. He agreed to meet me, not in an office, but on the banks of the Sasquatch River. He was a stout man with a face like a carved cedar burl, his long gray hair braided down his back. He listened patiently as I recount my story, my voice thick with grief and anger. I showed him the enhanced stills from my video and the photos of the clearing. He studied them for a long time, his dark eyes filled with a profound sadness. "You did not lose your wife to a beast," he said finally, his voice soft but resonant. "You lost her to the Sasquatch, the first people of the mountain." Joseph told me stories passed down through generations. The Sasquatch were not animals. They were a powerful, ancient people who lived between the spirit world and the physical world. They were guardians of the deepest, most sacred parts of the wilderness. To his people, they were to be respected, offered gifts, and above all, left alone. To enter their territory without showing respect, to spy on them with strange technologies, was a transgression of the highest order. He looked at the photo of Rebecca's remains arranged in the clearing. "This is not just a killing, but the mountain will demand a price for that knowledge." Joseph's words changed my mission. Revenge was a fire that had burned itself out, leaving only the cold ashes of sorrow. Now, I needed to understand. Why Rebecca? What was the message in its entirety? And I had to retrieve her other 3 trail cameras. The authorities had written them off as lost to scavengers, but I knew better. They had been taken. Those cameras held the final, undeniable proof, not just of their existence, but of their intelligence. I went back to Frank. "I'm going back in," I told him. "I need you to run security. Watch my back." Frank, who had since uncovered evidence that Ranger Thompson had falsified patrol logs for the week Rebecca disappeared, swore colorfully but agreed. "This is insane, Marcus. But I'll be damned if I let you go in there alone. I'm bringing my Mossberg." My last stop was Dr. Thorne. He equipped me with gear from his own collection, items he'd built or modified over the years. A state-of-the-art thermal imager, a parabolic microphone that could pick up a whisper from half a mile away, and a device that could detect infrasound, low-frequency vibrations he believed the creatures used to communicate and to disorient intruders. "Do not engage them," Thorne warned, his eyes grave. "You are not a soldier. You are an observer. Your camera is your only weapon. Document everything. If you make it back, we will change the world." Frank and I set out in early October, a year and a month after Rebecca's death. The autumn air was crisp, the colors of the forest turning to gold and crimson. But there was no beauty in it for me. The wilderness was no longer a sanctuary. It was enemy territory. From the moment we left the main trail and started bushwhacking toward the Cascade Creek drainage, I felt it. A palpable sense of being watched. The forest was too quiet. The birds were silent. A branch snapped just outside our tent. Then another, closer. A heavy thud against a tree a few yards away. A thrown rock. The most terrifying moment came just before dawn. A soft voice, whispering from the darkness. "Marcus." It was Rebecca's voice. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Frank grabbed my arm, his face pale in the faint moonlight. "It's a mimic, Marcus. They're messing with you." But hearing her voice, so perfectly replicated, nearly broke me. The next day we found the settlement, the place I had stumbled upon with the SAR team. But I had only seen the edge of it then. Now, with a year of research and a new understanding, I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a temporary camp. It was a village. It was nestled in a hidden basin, invisible from the air and inaccessible without a dangerous climb. There were at least a dozen structures, woven from branches and saplings with incredible skill, shaped like large domes. We saw a communal fire pit, cold but recently used. We saw tools, stone axes, hide scrapers, and crude spears with sharpened rock tips. We saw evidence of a food cache, with dried salmon and jerked elk meat stored in a small cave. On a flat rock I saw pigments, charcoal, ochre, and clay, and crude paintings on the rock face. They were depicting hunts, families, and a large central figure pointing towards the sun. This was culture. This was a society. Frank was speechless, his skepticism utterly shattered. "My God," he whispered, lowering his shotgun. "They're people." We documented everything, my hands shaking as I filmed. This was bigger than I ever imagined. We weren't just dealing with an unclassified primate. We were dealing with an uncontacted, indigenous people. A people who had every right to defend their home from ours. Guided by Rebecca's last known GPS coordinates, we pushed deeper. Her research, as I reached for the cameras, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the cave. It was massive, easily 9 feet tall, its body a wall of muscle and dark reddish-brown hair. It blocked the only exit. Its face was not ape-like. It was strangely human, with a flat nose, a wide mouth, and deep-set, intelligent eyes that glowed amber in our lights. The smell was overwhelming, a primal scent of musk, pine, and wet earth. This was the Alpha, the patriarch of the clan. Frank instinctively raised his shotgun. "Don't!" I yelled, stepping in front of him. Joseph said no aggression. From the shadows behind the great male, 2 others appeared. A smaller female, and a juvenile who clung to her leg, peering at us with a mixture of fear and curiosity. A family. The alpha male let out a low growl that vibrated through the stone floor. It wasn't a threat. It was a question. "What are you doing in our home?" Remembering Joseph's words, I slowly lowered my pack to the ground. I took out the only thing I had brought for this moment, my framed wedding photo of Rebecca and me. I held it up. "Rebecca," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm looking for Rebecca." The alpha creature tilted its head. Its gaze softened for a fraction of a second. It made a series of complex grunts and gestures, pointing at the cameras, then at me, then toward the forest outside. It was trying to tell me something. With my heart in my throat, I picked up the first of Rebecca's cameras. The memory card was still inside. I slotted it into my portable viewer, my hands slick with sweat. The footage began. It was from the morning she died. It showed her strapping the camera to a tree, her face bright with excitement. For a few minutes, there was nothing but rustling leaves. Then, movement. A female Sasquatch, the same one now standing 20 feet away from me, walked into the frame. He was letting us go. He had shown me the truth, and now the choice of what to do with it was mine. We walked out of that cave, leaving the photo of Rebecca behind on the stone altar. An offering of understanding, an apology. Back in the world of men, the debate was fierce. Frank and Thorne were adamant. "We have to release it, Marcus. This changes everything. Human history, biology, anthropology. Rebecca will be a hero." I looked at the footage from her camera, the miracle of birth, the tender way the mother cleaned her newborn, the protective stance of the father. And I saw the future if I released it. The helicopters, the soldiers, the scientists with their tranquilizer darts and cages, the media circus, the end of their world. We wouldn't come with respect. We would come with conquest. That night, I built a fire. I took the memory cards from Rebecca's cameras, the ones containing the ultimate proof, the footage that would change the world, and I threw them into the flames. I watched them curl, blacken, and turn to ash. Frank stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. "What did you do? After everything, why?" "Because it wasn't our story to tell," I said, the words tasting of smoke and finality. "Rebecca didn't die for science, Frank. She died because we went into a place we didn't belong, a place we didn't understand. Releasing that footage wouldn't honor her. It would just make us the monsters." The footage is still on my phone, the original 3 minutes and 47 seconds. It is the only evidence that remains. It's my burden, my penance. I visited Joseph Blackwood one last time. I told him everything I had seen, everything I had learned, and what I had done. He simply nodded, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You went seeking answers and you found wisdom," he said. "The burden of that knowledge is heavy. But you carry it to protect." The photograph I took on November 3rd, 2024, wasn't supposed to exist, according to the federal agents who showed up at my door 3 days later. And the reason they're so desperate to bury it has nothing to do with protecting Bigfoot. It's about hiding evidence of what these creatures have been doing to people for decades, while government agencies look the other way. My name is Marcus Dillon, and I've been running trail cameras on my 280-acre property in north-central Pennsylvania for 8 years. What started as simple wildlife monitoring to help with hunting season planning became something much more serious when I started capturing images that didn't match any known animals in our region. The photograph that changed everything was taken by a Reconyx Hyperfire camera, positioned along a game trail about half a mile from my house, triggered at 4:47 a.m. on what should have been just another quiet November morning. I've been a wildlife photographer since I got out of the Army in 2015, making a decent living selling nature shots to magazines and tourism websites. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, the peace and quiet of Pennsylvania's forests was exactly what I needed to get my head straight. The constant hypervigilance that kept me alive overseas had a hard time shutting off back home, but something about sitting motionless in a deer blind for hours at a time helped calm the noise in my head. I bought the property with my disability benefits and spent years learning every inch of the terrain, documenting the seasonal patterns of deer, bear, and other wildlife that used the trails and clearings scattered throughout my woods. The property backed up against state game lands, which meant I had access to thousands of additional acres where wildlife moved freely without human interference for most of the year. The terrain was perfect for wildlife photography. Rolling hills covered with mixed hardwood forest, several natural clearings where animals congregated, and a network of game trails that had been used by wildlife for probably centuries. 3 small creeks crossed the property, providing year-round water sources that attracted everything from songbirds to large mammals. What made the location especially interesting was its history. The previous owner, an old-timer named Earl Patterson who'd lived there for 60 years, had told me stories about unusual wildlife encounters that went back decades. Earl claimed he'd seen creatures in those woods that didn't match any known animals, but he'd learned to keep quiet about it after neighbors started treating him like he was losing his mind. The area sits in the heart of Pennsylvania's Bigfoot Triangle, a region bounded by Pittsburgh, Erie, and Johnstown where Sasquatch sightings have been reported consistently for over 40 years. Local residents have documented encounters with massive bipedal creatures throughout this region since the 1990s, but most of the evidence consisted of blurry photographs, ambiguous footprints, and eyewitness testimony that could be dismissed by skeptics. The Pennsylvania Game Commission had unofficial files documenting unusual wildlife reports throughout the region, though they never acknowledged them publicly. Game wardens occasionally filed reports about tracks that were too large for known animals, tree damage at heights that suggested creatures much taller than bears, and hunter encounters with bipedal figures that vanished into thick forest before clear identification was possible. Local folklore included stories passed down through generations of hunting families about massive, hairy creatures that could move through dense forest without making a sound. Native American tribes in the region had legends about forest giants that predated European settlement by centuries. The consistency of descriptions across different time periods and cultural groups suggested something more than simple imagination or misidentification of known animals. What made Pennsylvania particularly interesting for Bigfoot research was the terrain and climate. Dense, mixed forests provided excellent habitat for large omnivorous creatures. The mountainous topography offered countless hiding places and travel corridors where massive animals could move undetected by human observers. Most importantly, the state's extensive wilderness areas remained largely unexplored, with thousands of acres where unknown species could establish territories without human interference. I set up my trail camera network partly because I was curious about the local Bigfoot legends, and partly because the Army had trained me to gather intelligence systematically. Military reconnaissance taught me patience, attention to detail, and the importance of proper equipment positioning for maximum information gathering. If unknown creatures were living in these woods, my cameras would eventually document them. The key was patience, proper equipment positioning, and enough camera coverage to capture clear images rather than the typical blurry distant shots that characterized most Bigfoot photography. My camera setup was extensive and professional grade. 24 Reconyx trail cameras positioned throughout the property, each one chosen for specific terrain features and wildlife movement patterns. The cameras were mounted at varying heights to capture subjects of different sizes, with overlapping fields of view that would provide multiple angles on anything moving through key areas. Each camera was equipped with infrared flash systems that could capture clear images in complete darkness without alerting animals to their presence. The trigger systems were sensitive enough to detect movement from creatures as small as squirrels, but with enough processing power to distinguish between wildlife and false triggers from wind-blown vegetation. I spent months studying game trail patterns, identifying natural choke points where large animals would be forced to travel through, predictable routes, water sources, ridgelines, and transition zones between different types of habitat were particularly productive locations for wildlife photography. The most promising locations received multiple cameras to ensure comprehensive coverage. The Reconyx camera that captured the November 3rd photograph was positioned at the intersection of 3 game trails, about 12 feet from a natural blind where deer regularly stopped to scan for predators. The camera was set to take 5 photographs per trigger event, with minimal delay between shots, ensuring that moving subjects would be captured clearly, even if they were traveling fast. I'd been checking the cameras weekly since October, downloading thousands of images showing normal wildlife activity. Deer, black bears preparing for winter, occasional coyotes, and the usual assortment of smaller animals that populated the region. But on November 4th, when I reviewed the previous night's captures, I found something that made my hands shake so badly I could barely operate the computer. The first photograph in the sequence showed the familiar game trail intersection, with nothing unusual visible. The second image, triggered 3 seconds later, captured the clearest, most detailed photograph of a Bigfoot that has ever been taken. The creature was standing upright, in perfect profile, less than 15 feet from the camera, examining something on the ground with obvious intelligence and purpose. The detail was extraordinary. Every aspect of the creature's anatomy was clearly visible, from the sagittal crest on top of its skull to the individual toes on its massive feet. The body was covered in dark brown hair that appeared coarse and thick, clearly different from any bear fur I'd photographed. The arms were disproportionately long, hanging past the knees, with hands that showed opposable thumbs and delicate manipulation capabilities. The muscle definition visible beneath the hair coverage suggested immense physical strength, particularly through the shoulders and chest region. The creature's posture indicated perfect balance and coordination despite its massive size, estimated at over 8 feet tall and probably weighing close to 600 pounds. The proportions were humanoid, but scaled up dramatically from normal human dimensions. Most remarkable was the evidence of intelligence visible in the creature's behavior. This wasn't random animal foraging or territorial marking. The creature was examining specific features of the ground with obvious purpose, using its hands to move debris and investigate scent markers left by other animals. The behavior suggested scientific curiosity and systematic investigation rather than simple survival instincts. The quality of the photograph surpassed anything in the existing Bigfoot literature. Previous images had been distant, blurry, or partially obscured by vegetation. My November 3rd capture showed every detail of anatomy and behavior with crystal clarity, taken at close range with professional-grade equipment under perfect lighting conditions. But it was the face that convinced me I was looking at something genuinely extraordinary. The features were unmistakably hominid, but primitive, with a heavy brow ridge, deep-set eyes, and a facial structure that suggested intelligence rather than simple animal awareness. The nose was broad and flat, similar to descriptions in Native American folklore about forest giants. The mouth showed what appeared to be large teeth, but the expression was calm and thoughtful rather than aggressive. The facial hair was less dense than on the body, revealing skin that appeared dark and weathered. The eyes were particularly striking, dark brown, alert, and showing what could only be described as conscious awareness. This creature wasn't just examining its environment instinctively. It was thinking, processing information, and making decisions based on what it observed. The ears were small relative to the massive head size, positioned higher than human ears, and showing signs of excellent directional hearing capability. The creature's head movements suggested it was monitoring sounds from multiple directions while examining the ground, indicating sophisticated sensory integration and threat assessment abilities. Most unsettling was the obvious intelligence visible in the creature's posture and behavior. This being was conducting a systematic investigation of the area, not random foraging or territorial marking. It moved with purpose and confidence, clearly comfortable in the forest environment and completely aware of its surroundings. The third photograph, taken 4 seconds after the second, showed the creature looking directly at the camera. The expression was alert and intelligent, clearly aware that it was being photographed. The eyes showed comprehension and what appeared to be mild curiosity, rather than the fear or aggression typical of wild animals discovering surveillance equipment. The fourth and fifth photographs captured the creature moving away from the camera with fluid, deliberate steps that covered remarkable distances. The stride length and ease of movement through dense forest suggested this was a being perfectly adapted to woodland travel, comfortable in terrain that would challenge most humans. I spent hours studying the images, measuring proportions, analyzing details, and comparing them to every piece of Bigfoot evidence I could find online. The creature in my photographs was consistent with Sasquatch descriptions from across North America, but the clarity and detail were unprecedented. This wasn't another ambiguous blob or distant figure that could be dismissed as misidentified wildlife. Using military-grade image analysis software I'd learned to operate during my Army service, I examined every pixel of the photographs for signs of digital manipulation or hoax construction. The lighting was consistent throughout the sequence. The shadows fell correctly for the time of day and lighting conditions. And the creature's movement between frames showed natural momentum and realistic physics. The proportional measurements were consistent with Dr. Grover Kranz's theoretical models of unknown North American primates, published in his academic papers during the 1990s. The arm length, leg proportions, and estimated body weight all matched calculations that Kranz had developed based on footprint analysis and witness testimony from decades of Sasquatch research. Most convincing was the creature's behavior patterns, which showed intelligence and environmental awareness that would be impossible to fake convincingly. The way it tested the ground before putting its full weight down, the systematic nature of its investigation, and its obvious comfort in the forest environment all indicated genuine wildlife behavior rather than a person in a costume. I cross-referenced the anatomical details with primate studies from leading research institutions, comparing the creature's features to known great ape species and early hominid fossils. The combination of primitive and advanced characteristics suggested an evolutionary branch that had developed separately from both modern humans and known primate species. The photograph proved several things that previous Bigfoot evidence had only suggested. These creatures possessed sophisticated intelligence, demonstrated by their careful examination of their environment and their obvious awareness of human surveillance technology. They were perfectly adapted to forest environments, moving with ease and silence through terrain that would slow down most humans. Most importantly, they were real, physical beings, rather than myths or misidentifications. But when I began researching how to present my evidence to the scientific community, I discovered that clear Bigfoot photographs had a history of disappearing or being discredited through methods that had nothing to do with scientific analysis. Witnesses found their character attacked, their evidence dismissed without proper examination, and their lives disrupted by harassment campaigns that seemed designed to discourage other people from reporting similar discoveries. I decided to be careful about who I shared the photographs with initially. I sent copies to 3 Bigfoot researchers who had reputations for serious scientific approach to the subject. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum at Idaho State University, who had published academic papers on Sasquatch footprint analysis, Matt Moneymaker from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and Dr. Grover Kranz's former research assistant at Washington State University, who continued studying unknown primate evidence. The responses were immediate and consistent. All 3 researchers agreed that my photographs represented the clearest documentation of Sasquatch anatomy ever captured. Dr. Meldrum's analysis confirmed that the creature's proportions and locomotion patterns were consistent with his theoretical models of unknown North American primates. The BFRO wanted to coordinate an immediate investigation of my property to document additional evidence. But within 72 hours of sending those emails, my quiet rural life became a nightmare of surveillance and intimidation. Black SUVs with government license plates appeared on the rural roads near my property. My internet service became unreliable, with frequent outages that my provider couldn't explain. My cell phone started experiencing interference during important calls. The first direct contact came on November 7th, when 2 men in business suits appeared at my front door, identifying themselves as Special Agent Richardson and Agent Martinez from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They claimed to be investigating reports of endangered species on private property in Pennsylvania, and they wanted to examine any wildlife photographs I might have captured recently. I knew immediately that this wasn't a routine wildlife inspection. These men weren't biologists or wildlife managers. They moved and spoke like federal law enforcement, and their questions were too specific and too focused on my recent camera work to be coincidental. Someone had been monitoring my communications with the Bigfoot researchers, and these agents had been dispatched to control the situation. Agent Richardson explained that my property was located within the range of several endangered species that were protected under federal law. Photographing or disturbing these animals could result in serious legal penalties, especially if the images were distributed to unauthorized parties. They needed to review all my recent trail camera footage to ensure I hadn't inadvertently documented protected wildlife. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. They weren't asking to see my photographs, They were demanding them under the authority of federal wildlife protection laws, and they were making it clear that sharing those photographs with researchers or the public could result in criminal prosecution. I told them I would need to consult with an attorney before turning over any photographs, which was obviously not the response they wanted to hear. Agent Martinez became more direct in his approach. He explained that endangered species investigations were often classified to prevent harassment of sensitive animal populations. Cooperation with their investigation would be appreciated and remembered favorably. Resistance would be viewed as obstruction of federal wildlife protection efforts. They left me with business cards and the understanding that they would return within 48 hours for my decision. But as soon as their SUV disappeared down my driveway, I knew I was in serious trouble. This wasn't about protecting endangered species. It was about suppressing evidence of species whose existence challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife management and government knowledge. I spent that night researching the agents' names and credentials online. What I found was disturbing. Both men existed in government directories, but their official responsibilities were listed as classified or interagency coordination. They weren't wildlife biologists or conservation officers. They were intelligence operatives, whose job was managing information rather than protecting animals. More disturbing was what I learned about other witnesses who had captured compelling Bigfoot evidence over the years. The famous Jacobs photos from Pennsylvania in 2007 had been similarly clear, showing what appeared to be a young Sasquatch examining deer attractant. But the photographer had faced immediate pressure to discredit his own evidence. Other trail camera operators had reported equipment failures, data corruption, and technical problems that conveniently destroyed their best footage. The pattern was consistent and organized. Clear Bigfoot evidence was systematically suppressed through a combination of legal threats, technical sabotage, and character assassination. The goal wasn't to prove or disprove Sasquatch existence. It was to prevent public access to evidence that would force acknowledgement of unknown species living throughout North American wilderness areas. That realization led me to make copies of my November 3rd photographs and store them in multiple secure locations before the agents returned. I also documented everything I could about their visit, their vehicle descriptions, and their specific threats. If my evidence was going to be suppressed, I wanted a record of how the suppression was accomplished. The agents returned on November 9th with additional support. 4 men this time, including someone who identified himself as Dr. Peterson from the Smithsonian Institution. Dr. Peterson claimed to be a primate specialist who was assisting the government in identifying and protecting unknown primate species that might be endangered by human interference. His credentials appeared legitimate when I researched them later. Dr. Peterson had published papers on primate behavior and evolution, held a position at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, and possessed the academic background to make his claims credible. But his presence at my remote Pennsylvania property as part of a government suppression operation raised questions about how many respected scientists were involved in covering up evidence of unknown species. Dr. Peterson's approach was more sophisticated than the direct legal threats used by the other agents. He spoke the language of scientific research and conservation, appealing to my interest in wildlife protection and legitimate scientific discovery. His arguments were carefully constructed to make government suppression seem reasonable and necessary, rather than corrupt and self-serving. The existence of unknown primate species in North American forests, he explained, had been suspected by government biologists for decades. Recent genetic analysis of hair samples and tissue fragments had confirmed that at least one species of large primate was living in wilderness areas throughout the continental United States. The creatures were rare, intelligent, and extremely vulnerable to human interference. Public awareness of their existence would bring catastrophic consequences for the species. Curiosity seekers would flood into their habitat, destroying the delicate environmental balance that allowed them to survive. Hunters would view them as trophies to be captured or killed. Researchers would subject them to invasive studies that could traumatize or harm creatures that possessed intelligence levels comparable to early human ancestors. The government's approach had been to study these creatures quietly through legitimate scientific channels, while protecting them from public awareness that would endanger their survival. My photographs represented valuable scientific evidence that would contribute to ongoing research, but only if they were managed through proper scientific protocols, rather than released to the public through media channels that would sensationalize rather than protect the creatures. My photographs, he said, were valuable scientific evidence that would contribute to ongoing research. In exchange for turning over all copies and agreeing not to discuss my discovery, I would receive a substantial research grant and the opportunity to participate in legitimate scientific study of these creatures. The alternative was prosecution for violating endangered species protections and possible criminal charges related to interfering with classified scientific research. Dr. Peterson's offer was more appealing than the crude threats used by the other agents, but it contained the same fundamental message: surrender the evidence and stay quiet, or face consequences that would destroy my life. The research grant was hush money, and the scientific study was a cover story for suppression operations. I told them I needed more time to consider their offer, which bought me another 24 hours to prepare for whatever was coming next. That night, I uploaded the November 3rd photographs to multiple cloud storage accounts, sent copies to journalists who had experience investigating government cover-ups, and created a dead man's switch that would release the images automatically if something happened to me. The response was immediate and escalating. My internet service was cut completely, supposedly due to infrastructure maintenance that would last indefinitely. My cell phone service became so unreliable that I couldn't maintain conversations longer than a few minutes. The black SUVs returned to my rural road and stationed themselves where they could monitor all access to my property. More disturbing were the signs that my property was being surveilled around the clock. Motion detectors that I hadn't activated were triggering throughout the night, suggesting people were moving through my woods in darkness. My trail cameras began malfunctioning, producing corrupted images or failing to trigger at all. Equipment that had worked perfectly for years suddenly developed technical problems that rendered it useless. The message was clear: cooperate with the suppression effort, or face escalating consequences that would make normal life impossible. But the escalation also confirmed that my photographs were significant enough to justify extraordinary suppression efforts. The government wasn't just hiding evidence of Bigfoot. They were protecting something much more significant and more dangerous. I decided to break the pattern of intimidation and silence that had neutered previous witnesses. Instead of negotiating with agents who were obviously lying about their intentions, I would release the photographs publicly and let people decide for themselves what the evidence showed. The November 3rd images were too clear and too detailed to be dismissed through the usual debunking techniques. But when I tried to upload the photographs to social media platforms and Bigfoot research websites, I discovered that my internet access had been manipulated beyond simple service interruption. Specific websites and social media platforms were blocked, while others remained accessible. I could browse general news sites and check weather forecasts, but any attempt to share Bigfoot-related content resulted in error messages or failed uploads. The selective blocking revealed the sophistication of the suppression operation. This wasn't crude censorship that would be immediately obvious to casual observers. It was targeted interference designed to prevent me from sharing specific information while maintaining the appearance of normal internet access. The technology required for such precise content filtering suggested involvement by intelligence agencies, with capabilities normally reserved for national security operations. My Bigfoot photographs were being treated as classified information that posed threats to government interests, extending far beyond wildlife management or scientific research. I realized that the suppression operation involved resources and personnel from multiple federal agencies, working in coordination to prevent public awareness of evidence that would challenge fundamental assumptions about species diversity in North American wilderness areas. the Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, and intelligence community were all participating in a cover-up that had been refined through decades of practice on other witnesses. The implications were staggering. If the government possessed this level of capability for suppressing information about Bigfoot encounters, how many other significant discoveries had been hidden from public awareness? How many witnesses had been silenced, discredited, or eliminated to protect institutional interests that depended on maintaining ignorance about unknown species? The breakthrough came when I received an encrypted message from Dr. Meldrum, who had apparently anticipated that my communications would be monitored and interfered with. He provided instructions for secure communication methods and warned me that other researchers who had captured clear Bigfoot evidence had faced similar suppression efforts. Dr. Meldrum's message included disturbing information about the government's actual knowledge of Sasquatch populations. According to his sources within the scientific community, federal agencies had been aware of unknown primate species in North American forests for decades. The creatures weren't just real. They were being systematically studied and managed through classified programs that operated without public oversight or scientific peer review. The suppression of clear Bigfoot evidence served multiple purposes. It prevented public awareness that would complicate wilderness management and resource extraction operations. It avoided legal complications that would arise if intelligent species were recognized as having rights equal to those of humans. Most importantly, it concealed decades of government knowledge about species whose existence had been systematically denied, while policies were implemented that affected their habitat and survival. But Dr. Meldrum's most disturbing revelation was that some government agencies viewed Sasquatch populations as potential threats, rather than species deserving protection. Military contractors had been researching these creatures' physical capabilities, territorial behaviors, and potential responses to human encroachment. The research was focused on threat assessment and population control, rather than conservation and coexistence. My November 3rd photograph was significant because it provided clear evidence of Sasquatch intelligence and adaptability that challenged assumptions about how dangerous these creatures might be to human activities. The government's suppression efforts weren't about protecting Bigfoot from human interference. They were about controlling information that might complicate plans for managing or eliminating unknown species that competed with humans for wilderness resources. The realization that I was dealing with potential genocide planning, rather than simple scientific secrecy, convinced me to take much greater risks to ensure my evidence reached the public. The November 3rd photograph wasn't just proof that Bigfoot existed. It was evidence of government knowledge and planning that could save or destroy an entire species, depending on how the information was managed. Working through secure communication channels provided by Dr. Meldrum and other researchers, I was able to distribute copies of my photographs to journalists, scientists, and legal advocates who specialized in protecting indigenous rights and endangered species. The goal was to create enough public awareness that the government couldn't suppress the evidence without triggering a larger investigation of their suppression methods and motives. The response was immediate retaliation, designed to discredit me before my evidence could gain traction. Stories appeared in local media suggesting that I was mentally unstable, financially desperate, and seeking attention through Bigfoot hoaxes. Anonymous sources claimed that I had a history of alcohol problems and unreliable behavior that made me an unreliable witness. My military service records were leaked to reporters, focusing on medical treatment for PTSD and combat stress that was presented as evidence of mental instability. Neighbors were interviewed about my strange behavior and obsession with conspiracy theories. The character assassination campaign was systematic and professional, designed to destroy my credibility before people could evaluate my evidence objectively. But the attacks also revealed information about the suppression network that was valuable to other researchers. The coordination between government agents, media contacts, and local sources required resources and planning that proved this was standard procedure, rather than an improvised response to my specific case. Other Bigfoot witnesses recognized the pattern and began sharing their own experiences with similar suppression efforts. We learned that the government had been using identical tactics against Sasquatch researchers for decades. refining their methods through practice on witnesses who were isolated and vulnerable to intimidation. The collective resistance was more effective than individual efforts had been. When dozens of researchers began documenting government suppression tactics simultaneously, the pattern became obvious to anyone who was paying attention. The November 3rd photograph became a catalyst for broader exposure of systematic evidence suppression rather than just another piece of Bigfoot evidence that disappeared quietly. But the escalation also brought more dangerous consequences. My property was subjected to what appeared to be systematic surveillance and harassment designed to make normal life impossible. Equipment failures, utility outages, and accidents that damaged my vehicles and property occurred with suspicious frequency. Most disturbing was evidence that the surveillance had extended to monitoring wildlife on my property. Several of my trail cameras that weren't malfunctioning captured images of people in military-style gear moving through my woods at night. These weren't wildlife officers or researchers. They were conducting some kind of intelligence operation on private property without warrants or notification. The night surveillance revealed that government interests in my property extended beyond suppressing the November 3rd photograph. They were actively searching for additional evidence, possibly including the Sasquatch creatures themselves. The suppression operation had evolved into something that resembled a hunting expedition. That realization led to my decision to abandon the property and relocate to a more secure location, where I could continue releasing information about government Bigfoot suppression without risking capture or elimination of evidence. The November 3rd photograph had sparked a conflict that was larger and more dangerous than simple scientific disagreement. I'm telling this story from a location I won't specify, using communication methods that I hope will prevent government interference with this account. The clearest Bigfoot photograph ever taken is preserved in multiple secure locations, and it will eventually reach the public regardless of what happens to me personally. But the photograph itself is less important than what the government's response revealed about decades of systematic suppression of evidence that Sasquatch populations exist throughout North American wilderness areas. The creatures in my November 3rd image represent species that have been studied, monitored, and potentially targeted for elimination, while their very existence was denied to the public and the scientific community. The suppression network includes federal agencies, media contacts, academic institutions, and corporate interests that all benefit from maintaining ignorance about intelligent species that complicate assumptions about human dominance over natural resources and wilderness management. The coordination and resources devoted to suppressing Bigfoot evidence prove that these creatures pose perceived threats to economic and political interests that extend far beyond simple scientific classification disputes. My trail camera captured proof that we share North American forests with intelligent beings whose rights and welfare have been ignored by authorities who were supposed to protect all species within their jurisdiction. The creature in my photograph deserves recognition and protection, rather than systematic study for potential elimination. The November 3rd image shows a being that demonstrates curiosity, intelligence, and peaceful coexistence with the wildlife that shares its forest habitat. But government response to that evidence suggests that coexistence isn't the goal of classified research programs that have been studying these creatures while denying their existence to the public. The clearest Bigfoot photograph in existence is proof that systematic suppression of evidence serves interests that have nothing to do with protecting either humans or unknown species. It serves people who profit from maintaining ignorance about intelligence that challenges assumptions about who has rights to North American wilderness areas. The creature I photographed on November 3rd, 2024, deserves better than to become another casualty of conflict between human economic interests and species whose main crime was existing in territories that other people wanted to control. The photograph will survive, even if the suppression network succeeds in silencing everyone who witnessed what it reveals about government knowledge and intentions regarding our intelligent forest neighbors. The November 3rd image represents more than just proof of Bigfoot existence. It documents the moment when humanity had the opportunity to acknowledge that we share this continent with other intelligent beings who possess rights and dignity equal to our own. The government's response to that evidence reveals how we've chosen to handle that opportunity, with suppression, denial, and potential violence against species that pose no threat beyond challenging our assumptions about human dominance. The creature in my photograph was engaged in peaceful behavior, examining its environment with curiosity and intelligence. It posed no threat to human safety or economic interests, but the mere fact of its existence threatened political and corporate structures that depend on maintaining control over wilderness resources without acknowledging the rights of other species that inhabit those same territories. Every detail captured in those crystal-clear images tells a story about intelligence, adaptation, and survival in the face of systematic denial and persecution. The creature's careful movement, its obvious awareness of its surroundings, and its methodical investigation of the environment all speak to a being that possesses consciousness and deserves moral consideration. But the government's response tells a different story about human institutions that prioritize power and control over truth and justice. The coordinated suppression effort, the character assassination campaigns, and the potential planning for elimination of entire species reveal the moral bankruptcy of systems that claim to protect public interests while serving only the powerful. The trail camera that captured my November 3rd photograph was just doing what it was designed to do: document wildlife activity in Pennsylvania forests. It had no agenda, no preconceptions, no institutional interests to protect. It simply recorded what was there, creating an objective record of reality that no amount of government spin can alter or deny. That objective record stands as proof that we live in a world more complex and more beautiful than the simplified narratives we're told by people who profit from our ignorance. The creature in my photograph is part of a larger reality that includes intelligence, consciousness, and dignity in forms that don't match human expectations, but deserve recognition and respect. Truth has a way of emerging, despite the best efforts to suppress it. My trail camera captured evidence that will eventually change how we understand our relationship with other intelligent species. But only if people have the courage to demand accountability from agencies and corporations that have spent decades lying about what lives in our forests and what they've been planning to do about it. The clearest Bigfoot photograph in existence is more than just an image. It's a mirror that reflects our character as a species. How we respond to evidence of other intelligence will determine whether we deserve the position of dominance we've claimed over the natural world, or whether we're simply another predatory species that destroys anything it can't control or exploit. The creature I photographed deserves better from us. The forests deserve better. And the children who will inherit the world we're creating deserve honest acknowledgement of the intelligence and beauty that still exists in wilderness areas, despite centuries of denial and destruction by people who confused power with wisdom. The photograph exists, the evidence is documented, the truth is preserved in multiple secure locations. What happens next depends on whether enough people care more about reality than the comfortable life. Name, Frank Miller, is what is written on the plastic bracelet clamped around my wrist. I am also told that I am unwell. I am not alone, and so are the 17 other people that were told the same when we all experienced this event. Here, in the quiet, sterile halls of the Northwood Recovery Center, we are the broken pieces of a single, impossible moment. There is the retired schoolteacher from Ohio, the young couple on their honeymoon, the college student with his headphones. We are a tour bus of strangers, now bound by a shared, unspeakable truth. We are all patients here. We are all unwell. In our group therapy sessions, the story of a terrible bus accident is recounted. We are told of a gas leak, of shared hallucinations, of minds fractured by a collective trauma. A plausible, tidy explanation is given for why 18 separate lives were shattered in the exact same way. We are encouraged to talk about the grief and the confusion, but never about what was actually seen by us. We are forbidden to speak of it, but the knowledge is passed in the silent, knowing glances across the common room. It is seen in the flinch of the young woman from Portland when a doctor mentions unidentified wildlife. It is felt in the heavy silence that falls when the word hoax is seen on the television. We were not hallucinating. We were not confused. We were witnesses. Yes, it was a giant Sasquatch dead on the road, and we are the ones who saw it. My name is Frank Miller. I am 48 years old. For 25 of those years, the life of a long-haul trucker has been lived by me. More miles have been driven by me than most people will in 10 lifetimes. Every sunrise and sunset this country has to offer has been seen by me. From the swamps of Louisiana to the peaks of the Rockies. The difference between a deer and an elk in the dead of night is known by me. The shape of a bear as it bolts across the road is known by me. What is real and what is not is known by me. I am not unwell. I am being silenced. The event called mundane by them was the night a Sasquatch was killed by me with a Peterbilt 389, while a speed of 80 miles an hour was being done down US Route 2. The fantasy they say was created by me is the truth. A truth so massive and inconvenient that a decision has been made by them to bury me along with it. Everything was taken from me that night. My truck, my phone, my career, my freedom. But one mistake was made by them. I was left with my memories, and I was left with a pen and this stack of perfectly blank, perfectly harmless paper. Writing is encouraged by my therapist, Dr. Finch. It is called narrative therapy by him. He wants my feelings, my childhood, the stress of my job to be written about by me. Every last detail. From the squeal of the tires to the smell of the blood, to the look in the eyes of the men by whom it was all cleaned up. It is not being written for him, though. It is being written for you, whoever you are. I am watched, of course. I am checked on by the orderlies every hour. What is left on the desk is read by Dr. Finch, so what is wanted by him will be given. Pages and pages about stress and loneliness on the road. But this, the real story, will be written by me at night. The pages will be hidden by me under the loose floor tile beneath my bed. How it will be gotten out of here is not known by me. But it is known by me that this story needs to be told. Because it was not just my life that was taken. Proof was taken. But before my phone was taken, something was managed by me that is not known by them. A photo was sent. Just one. It was a desperate, fumbling act in the dark. But it is thought by me that it went through. That photograph is the reason I am in here. It is the reason I cannot just be let go. I was not locked up because I am thought to be crazy. I was locked up because it is known that I am not. So let me tell you what really happened on that cold, clear night in the Cascade Mountains. Let me tell you about what is now known as the Stevens Pass incident. The night it happened was a Tuesday, October 12th. A run from Seattle to Green Bay was being made by me, and a full load of Washington apples was being hauled. It was a good run, a profitable one. Good time was being made. The air coming through my cracked open window was sharp and cold, and the smell of pine and impending winter was in it. The sky was clear, and the stars were blazing, the kind of brilliant display that is only gotten deep in the mountains, far from the city's orange glow. My route on US Route 2 was taking me east. For those by whom it is not known, that stretch of road is one of the loneliest and most beautiful in America. After the suburbs of Seattle are left behind, the highway climbs, twisting and turning its way up into the Cascade Mountains. It is a two-lane blacktop ribbon that has been cut through millions of acres of dense, dark national forest. To your left and right, there is nothing but colossal Douglas firs and hemlocks. A solid wall of ancient trees that have stood for centuries. At night it is a different world. It is just you, your headlights, and the white lines being spooled out in front of you. An hour can be gone without another vehicle being seen. The darkness outside the reach of your high beams is absolute. That night, the road was empty. The ski resort at Stevens Pass had been passed, its empty chairlifts hanging like skeletons against the starry sky. The downhill grade was now being descended, heading towards Leavenworth. It was just after 2 a.m. My thermos of coffee was half empty. A classic rock station was being crackled softly on the radio, and the 18-wheeler was humming along, a familiar and comforting rumble. A good feeling was had by me. Alert. The road was straight for a couple of miles here. My high beams were on. A path of brilliant white light was being cut about a quarter mile ahead. My speed was steady, maybe 80, maybe a little more. The rig was heavy, and momentum was given to it by the downhill grade. It came out of the trees on my right. It was not a deer, its white tail being flicked as it leaped. It was not a bear, a low, dark shape being lumbered across the asphalt. This was different. My first impression was of size and speed. It was enormous, and it was being moved with an explosive, fluid power that had never been seen by me before. It happened in a fraction of a second, the way these things always do. One moment, there was just the empty road in my headlights. The next, a colossal, man-shaped figure was right there, caught in the full glare of my beams. It could not be processed by my brain. It was like a scene from a movie, too surreal to be real. It was upright, running on two long, powerful legs. Its body was covered in thick, dark hair, matted and shaggy. Its arms were long, being swung in a powerful, athletic stride. It was not running from me. The road was being run across by it, as if it were just an inconvenient clearing in its forest. Its head was turned to look at my truck, and its face was seen by me. It was for less than a second, but the image has been seared into my brain like a brand. It was not the face of an ape. It was not the face of a man. It was something in between, and something much older. A flat, broad nose, a heavy brow ridge. And the eyes, they were dark, and the light of my headlights was reflected by them. But underneath that reflection, a flicker of something was seen that can only be described by me as intelligence, surprise, and maybe even anger. Time was not had by me to brake. Time was not even had to swerve. At 80 miles an hour, a fully loaded semi-truck is not stopped on a dime. It is not even stopped on a football field. It is a freight train on rubber wheels. All that could be done was for the steering wheel to be gripped, my knuckles being turned white, and for the impact to be braced for. The sound was apocalyptic. A deafening, wet crunch of bone and flesh was heard, followed by the shriek of tortured metal. The entire cab of my truck was shuddered, a violent, bone-jarring jolt that I was thrown against my seatbelt by. The windshield was exploded inward, and I was showered with a galaxy of shattered safety glass. The thing's body, impossibly heavy, was thrown up onto the hood. Its massive form the grille was shattered by, and the engine compartment was crumpled by like it was made of tinfoil. The truck was veered violently to the right, the tires screaming in protest. The wheel was fought by me, trying to keep the rig on the road. But the weight was too much, the damage too severe. The truck was jackknifed, the trailer being swung around in a terrifying, unstoppable arc. I was just a passenger at that point. The world became a chaotic nightmare of sound and motion. The groan of bending steel, the roar of the engine as it was died. The sickening sound of my cargo of apples being crushed in the trailer. The truck was finally scraped to a halt, half on the road, half in the ditch. The trailer was slewed across both lanes. The highway was blocked completely by it. Silence. The sudden, ringing silence was almost as shocking as the impact. The engine was ticked as it cooled. The radio was dead. The only sound was my own ragged, desperate breathing and the frantic, panicked thumping of my heart. I was alive. I was shaking, covered in glass, but I was alive. For a moment, I just sat there, and an attempt was made to understand what had just happened. The acceptance was refused by my mind. A bear was hit by me. It had to be a bear, a massive, freakishly large grizzly bear. But it was known by me that that was a lie. Its face had been seen. Its two-legged stride had been seen. Slowly, my training and instincts were kicked in. The damage needed to be checked. Flares needed to be set out. Help needed to be called for. My seatbelt was unbuckled, my hands trembling, and the buckled door of my cab was pushed open. I was climbed down onto the cold, hard asphalt, my legs unsteady beneath me. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burnt rubber, diesel fuel, and something else. A thick, coppery, gamey smell. The smell of blood. And that's when what was left of it was seen by me. The thing that had been hit. It was lying in the middle of the road, tangled in the wreckage of my truck's front end. And the sight of it, even broken and dead, the hair on my arms was made to stand up, and a cold, primal fear was made to grip my heart. It was not a bear. It was not anything that had ever been seen by me before. And it was known by me, right then and there. The scene in my headlights was a tableau from hell. My truck was a mangled wreck, and steam was being hissed from the ruptured radiator. The asphalt was littered with shattered glass and twisted metal. And in the middle of it all, illuminated in the one remaining, flickering headlight, was the body. Roadkill has been seen by me my whole life. Deer, coyotes, raccoons. It is always a sad, messy sight. This was different. This was monumental. The sheer scale of it was hard to be comprehended. It was sprawled on its back, its limbs splayed at unnatural angles. It was easily 8, maybe 9 feet long. The body was thick, powerful, a mass of muscle and matted, dark reddish-brown hair that was now soaked in blood. A few hesitant steps were taken closer, my boots crunching on the broken glass. The gamey, musky odor was overpowering. It was the smell of a wild animal, but richer, deeper, and mixed with the sickeningly sweet smell of its lifeblood, which was being pooled in a dark, thick puddle on the road. Its legs were what were noticed first by me. They were long and powerfully muscled, shaped like a human's but on a mythic scale. One leg was horrifically broken. The bone was jutted out through the hairy skin. The feet were enormous, at least 20 inches long, with 5 distinct, man-like toes, the nails thick and yellowed like old ivory. My eyes were forced upward, past the barrel-chested torso, to the arms. They were long and ended in huge, 5-fingered hands. The hands were what truly shook me. They were not paws. They were hands, with opposable thumbs, calloused palms, and thick, dirty fingernails. One hand was clenched into a fist, as if in a final, defiant spasm. The other was open, palm up, in a strangely human gesture. My flashlight beam was trembled as it was directed towards the head. The force of the impact had been catastrophic. The skull was partially crushed on one side, but the face was mostly intact. It was the same face that had been seen by me for a split second before the crash. The heavy brow, the broad, flat nose, the wide mouth with thick, pale lips were pulled back in a death grimace, and large, yellowish teeth that were more human than ape were revealed. The eyes were open, and the starry sky was being stared at blankly by them. They were dark, deep-set, and even in death a spark of something profound, something ancient and intelligent was held by them. And an attempt was being made to process the impossible reality in front of me. A strange mix of terror, awe, and even sadness was felt by me. Something magnificent had just been killed by me. Something that had been managed to hide from the modern world. A ghost of the deep wilderness. And it had been obliterated by me with a ton of steel and a heavy foot. Then, a new thought was cut through the shock. Proof. This would never be believed by anyone. I would be called crazy. It would be said by them that a bear was hit and that my mind, rattled by the crash, had filled in the fantastic details. My phone. I was scrambled back to the cab, my movements clumsy and urgent. The inside was a wreck, but my phone had been tossed onto the passenger seat and was miraculously intact. The screen was cracked, but it was lit up when the button was pressed. A weak signal was had. 1 bar. It was enough. My hands were shaking so badly the camera could barely be operated. I was stumbled back towards the body, my heart hammering. This needed to be documented. Every angle, every detail. Pictures started to be taken. The flash a series of frantic, desperate strobes in the darkness. A picture of the face, the dark, intelligent eyes was taken. A picture of the huge, human-like hand, its fingers curled slightly, was taken. A picture of the massive, toed foot next to my own size 12 boot for scale was taken. The difference was comical, terrifying. Wide shots of the whole scene were taken. The body, the wrecked truck, the blocked highway. Picture after picture was taken, my thumb jabbing at the screen, a paranoid fear growing in me that the phone would die, or the body would somehow vanish into thin air. After about 20 photos were taken, it was known by me that something else had to be done. The single bar of cell service was flickering. It was not known how long it would last. 911 could not just be called. What would be said? A Bigfoot has been hit, and the highway is being blocked by it? A psych eval team, not a tow truck, would be sent. My brother Dave was thought of. He lived in Spokane. He was a bit of a conspiracy nut, into all sorts of weird stuff. He would be believed by me. More importantly, it would be known by him what to do, who the pictures should be sent to. My messaging app was opened, my fingers feeling fat and clumsy. The best photo was selected, the one that the creature's face was shown most clearly by. A frantic, misspelled message was typed. Dave, call me now. Hit something huge on US 2. Need help. Send was hit. The little circle was spun, and spun, and spun. For a terrifying moment, it was thought that it would not go through. Then, the circle was turned into a tiny check mark. Delivered. A wave of relief was washed over me. It was out there. The proof was out there. Whatever happened next, I was not the only one who knew. 911 was attempted to be called then, but the call would not be connected. The single bar of service was gone. I was alone out here, on a dark, remote highway with a wrecked truck and the body of a creature from myth and legend. A decision was made to set out my emergency flares, to warn any oncoming traffic. They were grabbed from my cab, and the road was started to be walked down, away from the wreck. The night was cold and silent again, the only sound the crunch of my boots on the glass-strewn asphalt. 2 flares had been placed, and I was walking back towards my truck when the headlights were seen. They were coming from the east, the direction I had been heading. Thank God, it was thought. Help is here. A state trooper, maybe. But as the headlights got closer, it was realized that something was wrong. There were no flashing blue and red lights, and it was not one vehicle. It was 3. 3 identical black SUVs, being driven in a tight, disciplined formation. They were moved with a purpose and speed that was deeply unsettling. They were not here by accident. They were coming for me. The 3 black SUVs were pulled up and stopped about 50 yards from my wrecked truck, and the gruesome scene was illuminated in a cold, sterile glare by their headlights. They were big, heavy-duty vehicles, the kind that are used by the government, with tinted windows so dark you could not see inside. They were completely unmarked. No license plates, no government seals, nothing. Doors were opened on all 3 vehicles simultaneously, with a quiet, efficient click. Men started to get out. There were at least 8 of them. They did not look like cops. They did not look like paramedics. Simple, dark, utilitarian clothing was worn by them, like tactical pants and jackets. They were moved with a quiet, practiced professionalism that was far more intimidating than any police uniform. They did not speak to each other. They just moved, and his exact role seemed to be known by each man. I was approached by 2 of them. They were both tall, fit, with short, military-style haircuts. Their faces were grim, emotionless. "Are you the driver of this vehicle?" was asked by the first one. His voice was flat, calm, devoid of any curiosity or surprise at the carnage around him. "Yeah," was croaked by me, my voice hoarse. Something was hit. It was run out in front of me. "Are you injured?" was asked by the second man, and I was scanned up and down by his eyes, not with concern, but with cold assessment. "No, it is not thought so by me, just shaken up." The first man was nodded slowly. "The situation is being handled by us, Mr. Miller." My blood was run cold. My name was known by him. How could my name possibly be known by him? No one but my brother had been called. "My ID, who is on this road, is known by us, Frank," he said, and my first name was used now. The casual intimacy was terrifying. "You are needed to come with us. You are going to be taken somewhere safe, to be checked out." While he was talking to me, the other men were already at work. They were moved like a well-oiled machine. Some kind of portable floodlights were being set up by 2 of them, and the entire scene was bathed in a harsh white light. A massive, thick black canvas tarp was being unrolled by 3 more. Another was taking photographs, but with a professional-looking camera, and the scene was being methodically documented from every angle. It was a cleanup operation. A highly efficient, almost silent cleanup operation. "Who are you people?" was demanded by me, my fear turning to a desperate anger. "Are you feds? FBI?" A thin, humorless smile was just given to me by the man. "We are the people by whom things like this are taken care of. Now please, come with us. The area needs to be cleared." They were not asking, they were telling. I was flanked, and a firm hand was felt on my elbow, guiding me towards one of the SUVs. I was looked back at my truck, at the body of the creature that was about to be wrapped up and spirited away into the darkness, to be erased from existence. "Wait," I said, being pulled back. "My phone." Pictures were taken. There is proof. A look was exchanged by the 2 men. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance, but it was filled with meaning. The calm expression of the first man was hardened slightly. "That phone will be needed by us, Frank," he said, his voice no longer even pretending to be friendly. "No," I said, and the phone was clutched in my pocket. "This is evidence. This is the biggest discovery in human history. People need to know." The second man was stepped in front of me, and my view of the scene was blocked. He was a big man, and his shadow was fallen over me. What was seen tonight was a large, disoriented animal. A bear, most likely. You were in an accident. You are in shock. Tricks are being played on you by your mind. It was the first lie, the beginning of the story that was being built for me. "That was no bear," I snarled. "What a bear looks like is known by me." Its face was seen. It had hands. A sigh was let out by the first man, a sound of weary impatience. "Give us the phone, Frank." I was not moved. In that moment, the phone was the only thing that made any of this real. It was my only connection to the truth. His voice was not raised. I was not threatened. He just nodded to his partner. The second man was moved with a speed that was shocking. My arm was grabbed, twisted behind my back, and I was slammed against the side of the SUV. The air was rushed out of my lungs. My face was pressed against the cold, tinted glass. Before I could even react, my pocket had been reached into, and my phone had been pulled out. It was handed to the first man, who glanced at the screen. Then it was slipped into his pocket. "This was for your own good, Frank," he said, his voice calm again. "You are going to be thanked by us for this later." I was put in the back of the SUV. The doors were locked with a heavy, final-sounding thud. Through the tinted window, the cleanup was watched as it continued. The massive, hairy body was rolled onto the black tarp by the men. It took 4 of them to do it, and they were straining with the effort. It was wrapped up tightly, being secured with thick straps, until it was just a large, anonymous black bundle. Another vehicle had arrived, a large, unmarked flatbed truck, the kind that would be used to transport heavy machinery. A small, portable crane was used to hoist the tarp-wrapped body onto the back of the truck, and it was secured under another, larger tarp. It was being erased, every last trace. I watched as something was sprayed on the asphalt where the creature had bled by a couple of the men, a fine mist from a silver canister. The dark, black pool of blood was fizzled and foamed. Then it seemed to just be dissolved, and the pavement was left clean and black. The whole operation took less than 20 minutes. They were impossibly efficient. When they were done, the road was clear, except for my wrecked truck. The creature was gone. The blood was gone. It was as if it had never happened. One of the men came to the window of the SUV and knocked. The driver, another silent, grim-faced man. It was rolled down. "The scene is sterile," the man said. "Asset is secured and en route." "What about his rig?" I was looked back at by the driver, then at the man outside. The official story is a single vehicle accident due to driver fatigue. A patch of ice was hit by him, jackknifed. The rig will be towed to a secure impound lot. It will be scrapped. Total loss. It was all planned. A story was had by them, a protocol for this. How many times had this been done before? The SUV started to move and was pulled away from the scene. And my life's work, my Peterbilt, was left a mangled wreck in a ditch. As we drove away, a standard local tow truck was seen arriving, its lights flashing. The handoff was seamless. The official world was now taking over from the shadow world. I was alone in the back of the SUV, a prisoner, my heart a cold, heavy lump in my chest. The body had been taken. My phone had been taken. It was thought by them that all the proof had been taken, but it was not known by them about the single photo that had escaped into the ether and had been sent to my brother. And it was the ride in the SUV was silent and dark. Where we were going was not known by me. We were driven for at least an hour, and the main highway was turned off onto smaller, unlit roads. We were eventually pulled up to a nondescript building that looked like a warehouse or a small factory, set back from the road and surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. There were no signs, no company names, just a blank, gray, concrete building. I was led inside, not to an office, but to a small, windowless room. The walls were the same dull gray as the outside. There was a metal table and 2 chairs. It was cold. I was told to sit by one of the men who had picked me up on the highway. Then he left, and the door was locked behind him. I sat there for what was felt like an eternity. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was running on pure adrenaline and terror. The crash, the sight of the creature, the arrival of the cleanup crew were all being replayed in my head. This was real. This was happening. This was not some backwoods police station. This was something else entirely. Finally, the door was opened, and a different man walked in. He was older, in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a tired, academic look. A simple tweed jacket and glasses were worn by him. He did not look like a thug or a government agent. He looked like a college professor. He was sat down across from me, and a thin file folder was placed on the table. It was not opened. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I am here to help you understand what was happened tonight, Frank." "What happened is known by me," I said, my voice hard. "A creature, a monster, was hit by me. And then your men showed up and it was stolen. And my phone was stolen." Dr. Thorne just nodded slowly, a small, sad smile on his face. "Frank, you were in a very serious accident. Your truck, a Peterbilt 389, was jackknifed after what appears to be a loss of control on a downhill grade. You are lucky to be alive. It is very common in such situations for the brain to be experienced trauma, for false narratives to be created to make sense of a chaotic event. The gaslighting had begun. It was so calm, so reasonable. It could be seen how it would work on someone who was less sure of what had been seen by them. It was not a false narrative, I insisted. It was 9 feet tall, it was covered in hair, and it had hands. Pictures are had by me. "Ah, yes, the pictures," he said, and the file folder was tapped. "Your phone was examined by us. The photos that were taken were inconclusive. Mostly blurry images of your wrecked truck, distorted by the flash and the shattered windshield." "That is a lie," I shouted, and my fist was slammed on the table. The sound was echoed in the small room. Dr. Thorne did not flinch. "Frank, memory can be affected by stress. Details that were not there can be created by it. A large black bear was hit by you. It is seen to happen on that stretch of road from time to time. Tragic, but not unheard of. The animal's body was badly damaged in the collision. In your state of shock, an attempt was made by your mind to turn it into something more significant. A story. A monster from a campfire tale. He was so good, so practiced. My reality was being twisted, and an attempt was being made to make me doubt my own eyes. Then where is the bear?" I challenged him. "Where is the body? Let it be seen by me." "The animal had to be disposed of according to state wildlife protocols," he said smoothly. "It is a public health issue. That is why the response was so swift. Teams that specialize in these kinds of highway clearances are had by us. Every answer was a neat, plausible lie, designed to seal up the truth in a concrete box. But one card was left to be played by me, my ace in the hole." I leaned forward. My voice was dropped to a low, intense whisper. "All the pictures were not gotten by you. Before my phone was taken by your goons, one was sent. It was sent to my brother. The best one. The one of the face. So your story about the blurry bear is not going to work, because the truth is already out there. His face was watched closely, and a reaction was looked for." For the first time, the calm, academic facade was faltered. It was just a flicker, a tightening around his eyes, a slight compression of his lips. But it was there. A nerve had been hit. He was silent for a long moment. The file folder on the table was opened for the first time. A single piece of paper was slid across the table towards me. It was a picture of my brother, Dave, standing on his front porch, smiling. It was a recent picture. "David Miller," Dr. Thorne said, his voice now cold, all pretense of kindness gone. "Lives at 435 West Pine Street, Spokane. Married to a woman named Karen. 2 children, Emily and Josh. All about David is known by us, Frank. And it is known by us that a message was received from you tonight. A picture." My heart was turned to stone. He had been gotten to. "This was told to us by you," Dr. Thorne continued, his voice like ice. "Just now. It was confirmed. And by doing so, a very serious complication has been created. Not for us, for you, and for David." The implied threat was hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "Before, you were just a man by whom something had been seen that should not have been. he said, and he was leaned back in his chair. You could have been treated, compensated for your truck, and sent on your way with a The fear that was felt was a different kind now. It was not just about me anymore. My family had been put in danger. What was done to him? I whispered. Nothing, Dr. Thorne said. Yet. David is fine. He is at home, sleeping. It is probably thought by him that your message was a prank, but he is being monitored by us. And if that photograph ever sees the light of day, David and his family will be found in a world of trouble. Audits, investigations, legal problems. Things that come out of nowhere and lives are ruined by. Is this understood? It was understood perfectly. This was how they operated, not with violence, but with the slow, crushing weight of bureaucracy and intimidation. So what happens to me? I asked, my voice hollow. Dr. Thorne stood up, and the file was closed. That is the complication, Frank. You cannot be let go now. You are a risk. A man by whom the truth is known, and by whom proof is had, however tenuous, is a man who cannot be trusted. But killing you would be messy, unnecessary. Other ways to ensure silence exist. He walked to the door. You see, a man who has photographic proof of a monster is a threat. But a man by whom it is claimed that photographic proof is had, who rants about monsters and government conspiracies, and whose brother denies ever receiving such a picture, well, that man is not a threat. He is just a tragic case. A poor, crazy soul who needs to be cared for. Permanently. The door was opened, and 2 large orderlies came in. They were not the men from the highway. They were dressed in hospital scrubs. A syringe was being held by one of them. Do not worry, Frank, Dr. Thorne said from the doorway, his face a mask of false sympathy. Very good care is going to be taken of you. You are going to be helped to get better. A fight was attempted, but it was useless. They were strong and efficient. A sharp prick was felt in my arm, and a cold liquid was spread through my veins. My body was grown heavy, my mind fuzzy. The last thing that was seen before the darkness was swallowed me was Dr. Thorne's face, and I was being looked down at with an expression that was not pity, but triumph. The monster had not just been taken. I was being turned into one. Waking up was like being swum up from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. My thoughts were thick and slow, my limbs heavy as lead. The first thing that I was aware of was the softness of the bed. It was not my sleeper cab bunk. It was a real bed, with clean, crisp sheets. The second thing was the light. A pale, sterile light was filtering in from a large window. My eyes were forced open. I was in a room that looked like a cross between a hospital room. A set of light blue pajamas was being worn by me, not my own clothes. On my wrist was the plastic bracelet, Frank Miller, and underneath it, a series of numbers. I was no longer a name. I was an inmate, a patient, a number. The door was opened and a woman in a nurse's uniform came in. She was smiling, a bright, professional smile that did not reach her eyes. Good morning, Mr. Miller, she said cheerfully. It is seen by me that you are finally awake. My name is Nurse Jacobs. How are you feeling? Where am I? I slurred, my tongue feeling thick and clumsy. You are at the Northwood Recovery Center, she said, her smile never wavering. You were brought here last night after your accident. You were very agitated. Rest was needed by you. My pulse was checked, her fingers cool and efficient on my wrist. An attempt was made to sit up, but a wave of dizziness was washed over me. The drugs were still in my system. What was given to me? I asked. Just a mild sedative to help you relax, she said. Dr. Finch will be in to see you shortly. Everything will be explained by him. She left as quietly as she came, and the door was clicked softly shut behind her. I was alone again. My legs were managed to be swung over the side of the bed, and I was stood up, my body protesting. I was walked to the window and looked out. A perfectly green lawn, a few carefully planted trees, and a high brick wall were seen. It was a pretty prison. A few hours later, the door was opened again. This time, it was him. The man who was going to be my jailer. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. He had a calm, handsome face, sharp blue eyes, and a smile that was all professional charm. He looked more like a CEO than a doctor. "Frank," he said, and a hand was extended. "It is a pleasure to finally be met by you properly. I am Dr. Alastair Finch. Your care here at Northwood will be overseen by me." His hand was not taken. I was just stared at by him. He was not Dr. Thorne, the academic interrogator. This was someone different, smoother, more dangerous. His hand was withdrawn without any sign of offense, and he was sat down in the chair by the desk. His legs were crossed, the picture of relaxed authority. "It is understood that a very difficult few days have been had by you, Frank," he began, his voice a smooth, reassuring baritone. "A profound effect on the mind can be had by a traumatic event like your accident. Confusion, memory distortion, even vivid hallucinations can be caused by it. What was seen is known by me," I said, my voice low and steady. "It was determined by me not to let my fear be seen by him." "Of course you do," he said, his smile patient, condescending. "What was seen felt completely real to you. That is the nature of these episodes. A powerful narrative is created by the mind to protect itself from the raw trauma. In your case, it seems a fascinatingly detailed story involving a cryptid, a creature from American folklore, has been constructed by you. It is really quite remarkable." He spoke as if a work of fiction was being discussed, a case study in a medical journal. "My job," he continued, "is not to tell you that what was seen was not real. My job is to help you come to that conclusion on your own. Through therapy, through rest, and with the help of some medication to clear the fog of stress, you can be guided back to reality." "And what reality is that?" I asked. "The reality where you are a hard-working truck driver, by whom the wheel was unfortunately fallen asleep at, and a terrible accident was had. The reality where an elk or a patch of ice was hit, and a monster was invented by your mind under extreme duress. That is the reality where you get better, Frank. That is the reality where you eventually get to leave this place." There it was, the terms of my imprisonment. Their lie was to be accepted, and maybe, someday, I would be free. It was to be fought, and I would be here forever. A fascinating case study for Dr. Finch. "And my brother?" I asked. "The photo?" Dr. Finch's smile was tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, yes. Your brother David was spoken with. A very concerned man. It was confirmed by him that you have been under a great deal of stress lately. It was said by him that a message was received from you, but it was just a blurry photo of a wrecked truck. He was very worried. Your treatment here is fully supported by him. It is believed by him that it is what is best for you. He had been gotten to. He had been threatened or lied to, or both. My own family had been turned against me, and they were made unwitting accomplices in my imprisonment. The lie was complete. It was airtight. So that is it, I said, and a wave of hopelessness was washed over me. I am just supposed to be sat here until it is agreed to be crazy? Not crazy, Frank. I was corrected gently by Dr. Finch. Unwell. And the first step to getting well is for the acceptance that help is needed. He stood up, and his suit jacket was smoothed. We will be talked again tomorrow. The nurse will be in with your medication shortly. Please, cooperate with the staff. We are all here to help you. He left, and I was alone with the crushing weight of their perfect, unbreakable lie. I was walked to the window, and the brick wall was looked at. A prison for my body had not just been built. One was being built for my mind. And I was terrified. Sasquatch was seen, was gone forever, and was replaced by Frank Miller, the poor, delusional truck driver. The days at Northwood were bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of medication, therapy, and quiet observation. The drugs that were given to me were subtle. I was not turned into a zombie by them, but the sharp edges were sanded off my thoughts, and it was made harder to hold on to my anger, my certainty. I was made compliant. My daily sessions with Dr. Finch were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. I was never directly called a liar. Instead, I would be guided through my own story, and the inconsistencies, the improbabilities would be pointed out. "So, Frank," he would say, being leaned back in his leather chair, "this creature that was seen by you, it was 9 feet tall. How was its height determined so precisely?" "In the dark, after a major collision, it was seen against my truck," I would reply, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "How tall my truck is known by me. And the hands," he would continue, and a note would be made on his pad. "You were very specific about the opposable thumbs. Is it not possible that in the chaos of the moment, what was expected to be seen was seen? That the details were filled in by your mind, already primed by folklore and campfire stories? My confidence was being chipped away at, piece by piece. My own words were used against me, and my certainty was twisted into evidence of my delusion. My past was brought up, my long, lonely hours on the road, my divorce 10 years ago, the death of my father. It was all woven into his narrative. I was a lonely, stressed man, predisposed to a psychological break. The Sasquatch was just the form my breakdown had taken. The other patients were a strange, sad collection of people. There was a woman, by whom it was believed she was a Russian princess in exile. A young man who was terrified of the color blue. An old man who was just sat in the common room all day, and a blank television screen was stared at by him. At first, it was thought they were just genuinely mentally ill people, and I was the sane man who was trapped in the asylum. But then, listening was begun. A man named Arthur was met during recreational hour in the garden. He was a former accountant from Portland, a quiet, bird-like man with nervous eyes. One day, we were sitting on a bench, and he was leaned over to me, his voice a low whisper. "Do not be convinced by them," he hissed. And I was not looked at. "Whatever was seen by you, it was seen. This is done by them. It is twisted." "What was seen by you?" I whispered back. Arthur was flinched, and a look was made around to see if any orderlies were watching. I was an auditor for a big aerospace company. Something was found. A black budget project. Numbers that did not add up. Trillions of dollars, Frank, over decades. Going somewhere. Off-world. A manifest was seen. A shipping list. Strange alloys, biological samples. Things that did not make sense. He was trailed off, his eyes wide with fear. The next day, I was called in by my boss. He was worried about my stress levels. 2 men in suits came to my house. My wife was told I was having a breakdown, and then I was here. Another patient, a young woman named Sarah who mostly kept to herself, once told me in a moment of clarity that she had been a geology student. A perfectly geometric structure, miles wide, buried 1,000 feet underground, had been found by her university team using ground-penetrating radar in the deserts of New Mexico. Before their findings could be published, their funding was pulled, their data was seized, and she was committed by her family after a sudden, violent episode she could not remember. They were all here for the same reason. They were inconvenient. A truth that was not meant to be known had been stumbled upon by them. A secret Sasquatch roadkill, a hidden space program, a buried alien city. The details were different, but the pattern was the same. Something is seen that should not be, and you end up at Northwood, where you are helped to get better by Dr. Finch and his team. We were a collection of loose ends, all neatly tied up in this quiet, comfortable prison. My fear began to change. It was no longer just the fear of the creature in the woods. It was the fear of this silent, invisible system. A machine that was designed to edit reality, to curate the truth. And it was a machine that was slowly grinding me down. The medication was making it harder for the details of that night to be remembered. The face of the creature was getting fuzzier in my mind's eye. The sound of the impact was fading. Sometimes, late at night, a sliver of doubt would creep in. What if Finch was right? What if I was just a tired, stressed-out trucker by whom a bad crash was had? What if this whole place was exactly what it claimed to be? That doubt was the most terrifying thing of all. Because if my hold on the truth was lost, if they were let to win, then I really would be crazy. And I would be trapped here forever, not by the brick walls, but by the prison that had been built inside my own skull. It was known by me that something had to be done. I had to fight back, not with my fists, but with the one thing that could not be taken from me. My story. The decision for everything to be written down was a turning point. A purpose was given to me. A secret mission within the monotonous walls of Northwood. It was a way to fight back, to preserve the truth before it was completely eroded by the drugs and Dr. Finch's therapy sessions. But I had to be smart. I could not just be sat at my desk all day and have things scribbled about wanted by him, had to be given. A therapy journal was started. During the day, long, rambling entries about my supposed stress would be written. The loneliness of the road, the long hours, the pressure of deadlines were written about. My failed marriage was written about, the details embellished to make it sound more traumatic. Dreams I never had, anxieties I invented were described. Pages were filled with the kind of self-pitying nonsense that I thought would be wanted to be seen by him, from a man on the verge of a breakthrough. And it worked. Dr. Finch was delighted. "This is excellent progress, Frank," would be said, the pages being tapped with his pen. "The real sources of your anxiety are beginning to be confronted by you. The layers of the delusion are being peeled back by us." It was seen by him as a sign of his success. It was seen by me as camouflage. My real writing happened at night. After the last check by the orderly at 11 p.m., a few hours of relative privacy were had. The floor tile under my bed was slightly loose. It had been carefully worked with the edge of my plastic meal spoon until it could be lifted. The space beneath was small and dusty, but it was perfect for the pages to be hidden. I had to be careful about supplies. Paper and pens were given to us freely by the orderlies, and we were encouraged to journal. But if too much was used, they might get suspicious. Only 1 or 2 extra sheets at a time started to be taken, and they were hoarded like treasure. In small, cramped handwriting, it was written to fit as much as possible onto a single page. For it all to be written down was agony, but it was also a strange kind of relief. As I was forced to recall every detail of that night, the memories became sharper again. The smell of the creature's blood, the weight of its body as my truck was hit by it, the cold, emotionless eyes of the men by whom it was cleaned up. For it to be written down was like it was being anchored in reality. It was made solid and real again in the face of their constant gaslighting. The crash was written about. The interrogation with Dr. Thorne was written about. My conversations with Arthur and Sarah and the other inconvenient truths that were hidden away in this place were written about. I was no longer just telling my story. A secret historian of the forgotten and the silenced was being become by me. The risk was immense. If I was caught, what would be done was not known. My medication might be increased until I was a drooling vegetable. I might be put in solitary confinement. Whatever it was known that it would mean the end of any hope of the truth being gotten out. There were close calls. One night, a surprise check was done by an orderly an hour after the last one. His keys were heard jangling in the hallway, and just seconds were had to shove the pages under my mattress and for sleep to be was shined into the room, the beam sweeping across my face. Then he was moved on. I lay there for an hour, not moving, until my heart rate was returned to normal. Another time, a cleaning crew came to wax the floors. I had to watch in silent terror as all the furniture was moved, their polishing machine humming right over the loose tile where my manuscript was hidden. Miraculously, it was not noticed by them. The more that was written, the more it was realized that this manuscript was more than just my story. It was my sanity. As long as it was being written by me, it was known that I was still me. Frank Miller, the man by whom something impossible was seen and who lived to tell the tale. The pages that were hidden under my floor were the real me. The man who was sat in Dr. Finch's office and his feelings were talked about was just a mask, a character that was being played in order to survive. After about 2 months, nearly 50 pages were had. A detailed chronological account of everything that had happened. The story was almost complete. Now, the hardest part came. A story was had, a weapon. But a weapon is useless if it cannot be gotten out of the cage. A way had to be found to smuggle my paper trail out into the world. And that meant someone had to be trusted. In a place that was built on lies, trust was the most dangerous gamble of all. For someone to be trusted at Northwood was like for a specific drop of water in the ocean to be found. The staff were all part of the system, either willing participants like Dr. Finch, or just people by whom their jobs were being done. Unwilling for the truth behind the pleasant facade to be seen, the other patients were too broken, too paranoid, or too deep in their own worlds to be reliable. But there was one person, a young orderly named Ben. He was different from the others. He was maybe 20 years old, and his way through college was being worked. Kind eyes and a nervous energy were had by him. The other orderlies were either bored and cynical or overly officious. Ben just seemed out of place. The hard, detached look of the others was not had by him. The patients were looked at by him with something that resembled genuine sympathy, not clinical pity. He was started to be observed. His routines, his interactions were studied. He was often on the night shift. He was quiet, and he seemed uncomfortable with the more forceful aspects of the job. He was once seen to hesitate when his medication was being roughly forced to be taken by the old man who stared at the TV by another orderly. Then had looked away, a flicker of disgust on his face. That was my opening. It had to be played carefully. My act of the recovering patient was continued. Excellent progress was being made. Participation in group therapy was started, and manufactured breakthroughs were shared. I even told Dr. Finch that it was beginning to be understood by me that the Sasquatch was a metaphor for my own inner beast of loneliness. He was practically glowing with pride. Privileges were earned by my good behavior. One of those was access to the library. It was a small, sad room with outdated books and old magazines, but it was a place where Ben could be talked to with a little more privacy. My chance was waited for. One night, he was the only orderly in the library, and books were being reshelved. He was approached, my heart pounding. "Ben," I said quietly, "can something be asked of you?" He was looked up, startled. Sure, Frank, what is up? Is it ever felt by you that this place is wrong?" I whispered. His eyes were widened, and he immediately looked towards the door. "What is meant is not known by me," he said, his voice a little too quick. "This is a good facility. People are helped here by us. Are we?" I pressed, my voice kept low. "Or are they just helped to forget?" My eyes would not be met by him. He went back to shelving a book, his hands trembling slightly. "I just work here, man. It is a job. It is known," I said. "And it is known that you are a good kid. That is why you are being talked to. You do not belong here, Ben. A conscience is had by you." What he was doing was stopped, and he looked at me, his face a mixture of fear and curiosity. "What is wanted, Frank?" This was it, the moment of truth. "Something needs to be mailed for me. I said. A letter. A thick one. To a journalist. No return address. Just have it be put in a mailbox a long way from here. You can be paid. Money has been saved up. It can be gotten to you by my brother. He looked horrified. No way. That cannot be done. My job would be lost. Serious trouble could be gotten into. You are not just going to be fired, Ben, I said, my voice cold and hard. If it is found out, you will be ended up in a bed down the hall from me. Too much is known by you. The files have been seen. It is known by you that some of the people in here are not crazy. He was paled. The mark had been hit. Things had been seen by him. Things had been heard. That did not add up. A story has been written down, I told him. The truth about what happened to me. Why I am really here. The truth about this place. These people need to be exposed. Help can be given by you. You can be the one by whom the whistle is blown. It was being laid on thick, and an appeal was being made to his sense of morality. But also he was subtly being reminded that he was already complicit. He was silent for a long time, and the book in his hands was just stared at. Why should you be believed? He finally whispered. A story is had by everyone here, because proof is had by mine, I said. And a picture is had to prove it. A picture that is out there, in the world. That is why they are so scared of me. A condensed version of my story was told to him. The crash, the creature, the cleanup crew, the threat against my brother. As I spoke, the doubt in his eyes was seen warring with a dawning horror. It will be thought about, he said finally, his voice barely audible. He would not look at me. He just turned and was walked out of the library, and I was left alone with the silent, dusty books. If I had succeeded, or if my own death warrant had just been signed, was not known. For the next 2 days I was completely avoided by Ben. My eye would not be met. I was sure I had been reported, and I was braced for the arrival of the orderlies and Dr. Finch, but nothing happened. Then, on the third night, he was on duty outside my room. As his rounds were done, a piece of paper was slipped under my door. His footsteps were waited for to fade down the hall before it was picked up. There was one sentence, scrawled in nervous handwriting. Next Tuesday, have it be left in the library, inside the copy of Moby Dick. The week leading up to Tuesday was the longest of my life. Every day was a tightrope walk of feigned compliance and barely concealed terror. My therapy sessions were attended. My medication was taken. My empty smile was smiled. The part of the healing patient was played, all while the secret manuscript, my 50 pages of truth, was felt like a lead weight under my bed. The final pages of my story were written. Arthur and Sarah were described. Ben and my desperate plan to get this account out into the world were written about. It was written that if this story was ever read, it would mean that Ben had come through, that a flicker of decency had survived in this place. It was ended with a plea to whoever might read it. The picture is to be found. My brother, David Miller, in Spokane, is to be found. The truth was started with a roadkill, but it is ended with you. The final touch was the address. It needed to be sent to someone by whom it would be taken seriously. Someone by whom it would not just be dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic. A journalist was thought of, a guy named Marcus Thorne, no relation to the interrogator, it was prayed, by whom a controversial blog dedicated to government cover-ups and unexplained phenomena was run. He was a long shot, a fringe figure, but he was the kind of person who might just be crazy enough for me to be believed. His name and P.O. box address were written on a separate sheet of paper. On Tuesday night, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was waited until after the 11 p.m. check. The orderly on duty was not Ben, which was a relief. The manuscript was carefully retrieved from under the floor tile. The stack of pages was felt impossibly thick. It was slipped, along with the address, inside the large manila envelope that had been managed to be snagged from the library's supply closet. Then the hard part came. I had to get to the library, My good behavior meant my door was not always locked at night, a privilege that was given to patients who were deemed low risk. The door was cracked open and I peered out. The hallway was empty, cast in the dim, humming glow of the overhead nightlights. I was moved as silently as I could, my bare feet padding on the cold linoleum floor. Every creak of the building, every distant cough, a jolt of ice was sent through my veins. The library was at the far end of the hall. It felt like a mile away. I was slipped inside, the door being whispered shut behind me. The room smelled of old paper and dust. The literature section was quickly found, my hands scanning the spines in the dim light. Melville, Moby Dick. The heavy book was pulled from the shelf. My hands were shaking as it was opened and the manila envelope was placed inside. It fit perfectly. The book was pushed back into its place on the shelf, the manuscript now hidden in plain sight. My part was done. It was all up to Ben now. I was crept back to my room, my body awash with a strange mixture of terror and relief. It had been done. I had fought back. Whatever happened next, I had not gone down silently. I was gotten back into bed, but it was known that sleep would not come. I just lay there, the ceiling being stared at, the quiet hum of the building being listened to. The creature was thought about, its dark, intelligent eyes staring into my headlights in its last moments of life. The cold efficiency of the men by whom it had been erased from the world was thought about. They were so powerful, their conspiracy so vast. What was my little stack of paper against all of that? It was a fool's hope, maybe, but it was the only hope I had. I must have been drifted off at some point because I was jolted awake by a sound that was not part of the building's usual nightly groans. It was the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. More than one person. They were moving with a purpose. They were stopped outside my door. I was sat bolt upright in bed, my blood turning to ice. This was not a routine check. This was wrong. Silence. Then a new sound. The jangle of keys, different from the orderly's keys. This was heavier, more official. Followed by the sharp, metallic sound of a key being slid into the lock of my door. They know. My eyes were darted around the small, white room. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The hunt for truth was felt the same. The lock was turned with a heavy, final click. This is where my story is ended, for now. Who is on the other side of that door is not known. Maybe it is Ben, caught and forced for me to be betrayed. Maybe it is Dr. Finch, his charming smile gone, ready for my treatment to be escalated. Or maybe it is someone who has not yet been met. Someone from even higher up the chain of command. If this manuscript will ever leave the library is not known. If Ben will make it out is not known. But it has to be believed that he will. It has to be believed that this story, my truth, will find its way to you. My name is Frank Miller,